Nobody noticed her until the day everything fell apart. That was how it always worked with Iris Cade. She had a talent for disappearing in plain sight. Not the kind of disappearing that came from shyness or insecurity, but the deliberate, practiced kind. The kind you learn when invisibility is the difference between coming home and not coming home at all. She'd been working at Harlow Regional for 11 months. Third shift janitor, mostly. Sometimes she covered the supply corridors during morning rounds when the regular day crew called out sick. She pushed her cart the same way every morning, unhurried, head slightly down, earbuds in one ear so people assumed she was tuned out. She wasn't. She never was. The staff knew her name the way they knew the name of the water fountain near radiology. Technically aware of it, rarely thinking about it, the nurses on the 4th floor had warmed up to her a little. A woman named Coleman always left her a cup of coffee on the counter by the linen closet, and Iris never said anything about it, just drank it while it was still hot. That was the closest thing she had to a friendship in this building. Dr. Hale was another matter entirely. He was 34, freshly appointed as head of emergency medicine after the previous chief had retired. Ivy League trained, sharp-tongued in the way that passes for competence in certain rooms. He had the kind of confidence that doesn't leave space for questions. Not from residents, not from nurses, and certainly not from the woman pushing the mop bucket past his office at 6:15 in the morning. The first time he spoke to her was in October, 3 weeks after he'd started. She'd been replacing the Sharps container in Trauma Bay 2 when he walked in with a clipboard and 2 residents trailing behind him like shadows. "Can you do that later?" he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "It's full," Iris said. "Protocol says." "I know what protocol says." He did look up then, briefly, the way you look at a traffic cone you almost tripped over. "I have a teaching round in here in 10 minutes. Do it after." She looked at the container. It was past the fill line. She looked at him. She did it after. That was the beginning of a pattern, not cruelty exactly. Hale wasn't the type who enjoyed it. He was simply the type who didn't notice, which can end up looking the same from the outside. He talked over her in hallways. He waved her out of rooms mid-task. Once, during a particularly bad week in November, he called her the cleaning lady in front of a group of medical students. And not one of them blinked. Iris didn't say anything. She never did. She had learned a long time ago that the people who talked the loudest about what they knew were almost always that people who had never had to use that knowledge when it actually mattered. In her experience, the moment things got real, the moment the noise stopped and the blood started, people sorted themselves out fast. She had sorted herself out once. In a place very far from here. She tried not to think about that. The weather turned bad in early February. A storm system pushed through the Ohio Valley for 3 days straight, and by Thursday morning, the roads into Harlow were a mess of black ice and highway closures. Half the day shift didn't make it in. The ER was running on a skeleton crew. The waiting room was backed up to the door, and the heat in the East Wing had been cutting out intermittently since Tuesday. Iris had been there since 4 in the morning. She wasn't supposed to cover facilities during a storm event. That was maintenance domain. But the facilities supervisor, a tired man named Goff, had texted her at 3:45 asking if she could come in early to help manage the supply runs while his crew handled the heating issue. She said yes. She always said yes. It was easier. By 8 o'clock, she'd made 4 trips between the supply dock and the ER, restocked the trauma bays, replaced 2 broken IV poles, and cleared a drain in the staff bathroom that had been backing up for a week. She was on her way back from the loading dock when she heard Hale's voice carrying down the corridor. Sharp, certain, a little too loud for the hour. "We're not a trauma center, I've said this. If he's that critical, he needs to be transferred." She slowed without meaning to. "Roads are closed, Dr. Hale." That was Nurse Pryor, steady, measured. "Transport is backed up 2 hours minimum. Then we stabilize and we wait." "That's the protocol. He's been waiting. His pressure keeps dropping." A pause. Then, "Get me a second line and bump the dopamine. And someone find me a second year who actually showed up today." Iris kept walking. She found out later that the patient's name was Burroughs. 61 years old, brought in by his son-in-law at 5 in the morning after collapsing on his front porch. The working assumption was cardiac, possible MI, maybe something worse. They'd gotten him to a bay, started the workup, but his numbers kept sliding in the wrong direction, and nobody could figure out why fast enough. She found out about Burroughs because 20 minutes later the East Wing lost power. Not the whole wing, just a section of it. The backup generators caught most of it, but there was a gap, maybe 40 seconds, where the monitors in Bay 3 flickered and the overhead lights went to emergency red. And in that gap, something in the ceiling shifted. Later, the facility's report would say it was a compromised junction in the HVAC duct. Ice accumulation on the rooftop unit. Pressure on a fitting that had already been flagged for maintenance last spring. Nobody had gotten to it. Iris heard the sound before she saw anything. A low creak from somewhere above her, then a crack like a bat hitting concrete, and then she was moving. She was already in the corridor outside the bays. She rounded the corner into Bay 3. At the same moment, a section of ceiling panel came down. Not catastrophic, not a collapse, but a 4-foot section of tile and duct housing that hit the equipment tray on Burroughs' left side and sent the crash cart skidding across the floor. The room went still for a moment, the way rooms do after something violent and unexpected. Then everyone moved at once. Wrong. One of the residents, a young woman named Tanaka, scrambled for the crash cart. Another stepped back. An orderly pressed himself against the wall. Nurse Pryor got to the head of the bed immediately, checking Burroughs' airway, which was the right call. But his monitors were down and the backup unit was on the other side of the room, and nobody was moving to it. Hale came through the door 40 seconds later. Iris had been counting. He took in the scene. His jaw tightened. "Tanaka, get that cart back online. Where are his vitals? Monitors down, the impact. Someone give me a manual pressure." Pryor was already moving, but she had her hands full with the airway. The second resident was fumbling with a cuff. Burroughs had his eyes open, fixed on the ceiling, breathing in shallow, rapid pulls that Iris recognized without thinking about it. The way she recognized a lot of things now, the way knowledge that gets burned into you young never fully leaves. She had crossed the room before she decided to. She picked up the BP cuff from the resident gently, the way you take something from someone who doesn't know how to hold it. She got it on Burroughs' arm in 4 seconds, pumped it, read it. 82/50, she said. Hale looked at her, not the way he usually looked at her, through her, past her, around her. This was different. This was the look of someone who has just heard a voice from an unexpected direction and is trying to locate it. "Excuse me," he said. 82/50. He's dropping." She kept her eyes on Burroughs. Breath sounds are asymmetrical. You can hear it if the room's quiet. The room was quiet. Everyone in it had stopped moving. Hale's face went through something, irritation, confusion, the beginning of dismissal. He opened his mouth. She's right. Pryor. Quiet, firm. She'd been listening. Left side is diminished. Who are you? Hale said to Iris. Facilities, she said. I cover the supply runs. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did. I need a physician in here, not a... You need a needle, Iris said. She said it the same way she'd said the blood pressure. No heat in it, no apology. Just the information. 14 gauge, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. He's got air where it shouldn't be. That's why he's been dropping. Silence. Burroughs coughed. Once. And the sound of it was wet and wrong. Hale looked at Pryor. Pryor was already looking at the supply cart. Iris had crossed to it without anyone telling her to. She found the needle in the third drawer, which was where it should have been because she had restocked that cart 2 hours ago. She held it out to Hale. He didn't take it immediately. He was looking at her the way you look at something you've been walking past every day and have suddenly, for the first time, actually seen. You can't. He started. I know, she said. You do it. Second intercostal. You'll hear the rush. He took the needle. What happened next took about 90 seconds. She talked him through the landmarks. Not because he didn't know them, but because he was shaken and she wasn't. And sometimes the person who isn't shaken needs to say the words out loud so the person who is can hear them. She had done this before. More times than she wanted to count. The rush of air came exactly when she said it would. Burroughs' breathing changed within 30 seconds. Not fixed. He still needed a chest tube, still needed imaging, still needed things this facility couldn't fully provide. But the immediate crisis, the thing that had been quietly killing him for the last 2 hours, while everyone chased the obvious answer, that was addressed. His pressure started coming back. Pryor exhaled. Tanaka had tears on her face and didn't seem to know it. The orderly was still against the wall. Hale straightened. He was still holding the needle. He turned to look at Iris, who had already stepped back, already putting distance between herself and the bed, the way you do when the emergency is over and the professionals are back in control. Who are you? He said again, different this time. She looked at him. She was aware of the whole room looking at her. Iris Cade, she said. I handle the East Wing supply routes. She reached down and picked up her work gloves from where they'd fallen during all of it. You're going to want to call that chest tube consult soon. He's going to need it before transport. She walked out of the bay. Coleman found her in the supply corridor 20 minutes later, refilling the cart she'd left in the hallway. Iris, not a question, just her name landed softly. Iris kept counting packages of gauze. They're saying you diagnosed a tension pneumo in Bay 3. I pointed something out, Iris said. Hale made the call. Iris. She stopped counting. She put the gauze down. Coleman was a woman in her late 40s, 22 years of nursing at this hospital, the kind of person who knew when to push and when to simply stand nearby. She was standing nearby now. Are you okay? Coleman asked. Iris thought about it, which was unusual, because she didn't normally let herself think about it. Yeah, she said. I'm okay. Coleman looked at her for a long moment. You've done that before. It wasn't a question either. Iris went back to the gauze. Done what? Talked someone through a procedure in a room that was falling apart. A pause. That's not a thing you get from reading. The supply corridor was quiet. Down the hall, she could hear the sounds of the resetting. Voices returning to normal register. Equipment being repositioned. Someone calling for a transfer consult. The ordinary sounds of after. Iris had always been good at after. The during was the hard part, not because she couldn't handle it. That had never been the problem. But because every during dragged her back somewhere she'd spent years trying to leave distance between herself and. She had been 26 the first time she'd performed a needle decompression. Not in an ER, not in a hospital, in a building in Kandahar that had lost its roof on the north side, with the dust still settling and her team lead down, and a corporal named something she couldn't say anymore going blue under her hands. She'd used a 14 gauge then too. They didn't have a lot of options. She had been 26, and she had been a combat medic attached to a special operations unit that she wasn't supposed to talk about the details of, and by the time she was 31, she had performed more emergency interventions in more bad rooms than most emergency physicians would see in a career. Then she'd come home, and she'd found out what came after the after. She didn't tell Coleman any of this. What she said was, "I've seen a few things." Coleman nodded slowly, the way people nod when they know there's a whole geography behind a sentence, and they're respecting the border of it. "You should talk to someone," Coleman said, "after today. Even if today felt manageable." Iris looked at her. It did feel manageable. "That's sometimes the problem," Coleman said, and left her to the gauze. Hale found her an hour later. She was in the East Wing stairwell, sitting on the second step from the bottom, eating a granola bar she'd had in her jacket pocket since Tuesday. The building's heat had come back on, and she could feel it working its way through the cold concrete. Outside, the storm was still going. She could hear it in the walls. She heard the stairwell door before she heard him. He stood at the top of the short landing, one hand still on the door. He looked, for the first time since she'd seen him, like a man who wasn't entirely sure of himself. "Cade," he said. "Hale," she said. He came down the steps, didn't sit, just stood there in the way men stand when they have something to say and aren't sure how to start it. "Burroughs is stable," he said finally. "Transport's about an hour out. We got the chest tube in." "Good," she said. "He asked about you." She looked up. "He asked who the woman was," Hale said. "His son was in the room when they brought him to. He said to tell her." He stopped. Exhaled. "He said to tell her thank you." Iris looked down at the granola bar wrapper in her hands. "You can tell him I'm glad he's okay," she said. Hale was quiet for a moment. She could feel him building up to something. She had learned to recognize that particular kind of silence. Men who weren't used to being wrong, finding their way toward the words. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You don't," she said. "I do." He said it like he meant it, which surprised her slightly. "Not just for this morning, for the pattern of how I've spoken to you." She looked up at him again. He wasn't looking away, which she respected. "I didn't think you noticed," she said. "I didn't," he said. "That's what I'm apologizing for." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the kind of nod that closes a topic cleanly without erasing it. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "The needle, the landmarks, the way you talked through it. That's not. You didn't pick that up here." She was quiet. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I know," she said. Another silence. The building hummed around them. Somewhere above, she heard the elevator. "I was a combat medic," she said, "attached to a special operations unit. 2 deployments in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. 6 years total, active component." She folded the wrapper in half, then in half again. "I've been out for 4 years. He let that land. "Why facilities?" he said. And he'd sighed. And he didn't say it the way he might have said it 6 months ago, with the edge, with the unspoken what a waste underneath it. He said it the way someone says something when they genuinely don't understand and are willing to wait for the answer. She thought about how to explain it. When I got back, she said, I needed quiet. I needed a job where I could be useful without being responsible for anyone living or dying. She paused. For a while, I thought that was a permanent condition. Now I think it was just what I needed then. She looked at her hands. Today was the first time in 4 years I've done anything that came close to what I used to do. How does it feel? She thought about the rush of air when the needle went in, the way Burroughs's color had started to come back, the sound of Pryor exhaling. Like something I was supposed to do, she said, which is the part that scares me. Hale sat down on the step beside her then. Not close, just present. I have a colleague at Ohio State, he said. She runs a program for veterans transitioning into civilian clinical medicine, non-traditional pathways. It's not easy. There's schooling, there's licensing, but it recognizes what people bring in from the field. He paused. I can give you her number, if you want it. No pressure. Iris looked at the stairwell door above them. She had spent 4 years building a life that asked nothing hard of her. She'd been grateful for it, genuinely, not bitterly. She'd needed the quiet. Coleman was right about that, but there was something that had happened in Bay 3 that she couldn't quite put back down. The way her hands had known what to do before her brain had finished deciding. The way Burroughs had breathed differently because she'd been in the room. The way Tanaka's face had looked after. Not just relief, but something like the first glimpse of how large this work could be. She had stood in that room, and she had been entirely herself, maybe for the first time since she'd come home. Write it on something I won't lose, she said. He almost smiled. I'll put it in the system, under your employee file. She looked at him sideways. You know how to navigate employee files? I know how to navigate everything in this hospital, he said. I've just been spending that time in the wrong rooms. She didn't say anything to that, but she didn't disagree. She stayed until the end of her shift at noon. Then, an hour past it to make sure the storm supply inventory was logged correctly and the replacement ceiling panel in Bay 3 was ordered. Goff told her twice she could go. She stayed anyway. The staying was its own kind of habit. Not the anxious kind, but the kind that comes from being trained in environments where leaving before the job is done has consequences. At 12:40, she pulled on her coat in the employee locker room. Coleman was in there changing out of her shift scrubs, and they stood together for a moment in the comfortable silence of two people who had been through a long morning. You're going to do something about it, Coleman said. Not a question. Maybe, Iris said. I've known you 11 months, Coleman said. That's a yes. Iris looked at herself briefly in the mirror above the sink. Gray work jacket, hair pulled back tight, the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes. She looked like a woman who pushed a supply cart for a living. She had looked like that on purpose for 4 years, and it had kept her safe in the way that quiet keeps things safe, by not asking too much of them. She thought about a corporal whose name she couldn't say out loud anymore. About the dust settling, about the color coming back, about Burroughs's son somewhere in the waiting room not knowing yet that his father was going to make the transport. She thought about Tanaka's face. Yeah, she said, probably a yes. She pushed out the door into the February cold, and the wind hit her and she walked into it the same way she'd always walked into hard things. Directly, without bracing, because she had learned a very long time ago that bracing doesn't actually help. The parking lot was still mostly ice. She moved carefully across it, watching her footing, her breath making small clouds in front of her. She had a phone call to make. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. There were people in rooms like Bay 3 all over this country, and there were not nearly enough people who knew what she knew and were willing to use it. She had told herself for 4 years that this was someone else's problem to solve. She had told herself she had given enough, spent enough, lost enough. Maybe that had been true then. She thought about the rush of air, the way Burroughs's chest had moved differently after. The particular quality of the silence in the room when something that was going wrong had stopped going wrong, and everyone in it knew it at exactly the same moment. She had spent 4 years making herself small. She got to her car, brushed the snow off the windshield with her sleeve, and sat for a minute with the heat running and her hands on the wheel. There were still 12 names she didn't let herself say. Still nights. She woke up at 3 in the morning listening for sounds that weren't there. Still days when the supply corridor felt like the safest place in the world because nothing in it could die. She wasn't done healing, she knew that. But she was starting to understand that healing and being useful weren't the two separate things she'd believed they were. She had thought she had to finish one before she started the other. Maybe you did both at once. Maybe that was the whole point. She put the car in reverse and pulled out of the space, slowly, watching her mirrors in the gray winter light. Iris Cade, facilities, East Wing supply routes. For now,